What's going on, everybody? I'm Zach, this is the Command Dudes, and today I'm bringing you a new kind of video. That's right, this is going to be our first deck tech video. Hope you guys enjoy it. Commander I'm talking about this time is going to be Tergrid, the God of Fright, or as I like to call, Tergrid. God of Fright? The main reason it's called Tergrid is because, well, you're gonna feel like a turd playing her, and all your friends are gonna feel like turds playing too. The way I kinda imagine this video is being like a video essay, so I'm just gonna give you guys the meat of the commander, give you all the synergies, give you the juice, which is gonna be like the OP cards that you really need to top deck in a pinch, and then give you my thoughts on the deck in general. So with that being said, let's get this thing started and hop into the meat of the deck. The meat! Alright, so let's just start out by explaining what this commander does. Tergrid, God of Fright. She's a legendary creature, she's God, costs 3 and 2 blacks, got Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. She's a 4/5. The other side, we're not going to be really focusing on this deck, but you definitely can use it. I'll go ahead and read it now. Tergrid's Lantern. Tap, target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. 3 and a black, untap Tergrid's Lantern, costs 4 mana to play. This, if you have infinite mana, you can just kill somebody, but our main focus on this deck is using the creature side because we are going to be focusing on discarding as many cards from our opponent as possible, as well as sacrificing the creatures they choose to play. Since this deck focuses on 2 kind of strategies coexisting, that being discard and sacrificing, I'll break these into 2 separate sections and give you some examples of cards you might want to run in the deck to get the best use out of those effects. Let's first start with discard cards. There's quite a few creatures that when they enter the battlefield, they make your opponents discard cards. So let's give these ones as a few examples. Burglar Rat costs 2 mana, 1 and a black. When Burglar Rat enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, so 1/1. Pretty good, you get 3 cards, hopefully they discard permanents, and you just net 3 cards on the battlefield. Pretty broken for 2 mana. Next up we got Rotting Rats. When Rotting Rats comes into play, each player discards a card. Unearth for 2 mana as well, so you can bring it back to double up on this effect. Unfortunately, this one you have to discard a card as well, but you get the benefit of making everyone do it. So you get 3 cards for the minus of your 1 card, so that's pretty good profit, and you get to do it again later on. Sounds pretty sweet to me. Lastly, we got Liliana Spectre. It costs 3 mana. This one makes only your opponent's discard card, and it's flying, so it gives you a lot of protection against decks if they get out early flyers that harass you, or later on if you just need a blocker to, like, say, prevent a big old dragon from hitting you. This is a great card to get in there. Now, along this same discard theme, there's a couple planeswalkers that I've chosen to put in my deck that are pretty sweet in this deck. First, Davriel Rogue Shadow Mage. He has 3 loyalty for 3 mana, and you can -1 to make a target player discard a card. And at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, this planeswalker deals 2 damage to them. So this guy lets you have like recurring discard, which is great to set up before you play your Tergrid, so then you can get value on her when she comes into play. And on top of that, it has a utility of burning opponents if you say wheel them or you make them discard their whole hand. Then you keep on just racking up all that damage, which is pretty sweet. The other planeswalker I've chosen to put in the deck is Liliana, Waker of the Dead. 4 mana, comes in with 4 loyalty. You can +1. Each player discards a card. Each opponent who can't loses 3 life. So this card's great, although you have to discard 2. She makes your opponent's discard, which makes you get so much value when you have your commander out. On top of this, it can also be a kill spell with its -3 ability, and at -7 you can start bringing back creatures every turn and giving them haste. So I doubt that'll ever happen, but if it does, it's really powerful and it's great in this deck. Moving on to the second part of the meat, we got the sacrifice effect, and there's a lot of creatures that when they enter the battlefield cause your opponents to sacrifice creatures as well. So let's go over some examples, as well as some other cards that do similar effects. Starting us off, we got the one, the only, Fleshbag Marauder. 3 mana, it's a 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. This guy and all the creatures I'm about to explain that are similar to this one, they all have their cost built into them, so you could always sacrifice themselves and then get the value on everybody else. So with the Fleshbag Marauder, you play this 3 mana guy. Hopefully you make your opponent sacrifice 3 non-token creatures. and then you gain all of those on your side of the battlefield. The next one, Merciless Executioner, same thing, 3 mana, 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. It's like the going rate these days for making everybody sacrifice is 3 mana, so that's just what we gotta pay. Another great option in the deck is Playcrafter, 3 mana. It's the same effect, but they also can sacrifice Planeswalkers, and then each player who can't sacrifice discards a card. This is probably the best card that you can run that has this effect in the deck, just because it's a win-win situation for you. Outside of creatures, there's great cards like Soul Shatter, which is relatively new. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among creatures and planeswalkers they control. This card's great because it doesn't allow your opponents to choose tokens as the sacrifice target. This makes sure that you get their biggest, baddest creature, basically, and you get the most value possible out of making your opponent sacrifice. This is one of the few sacrifice cards that actually scales really well in the game, whereas the other ones are really good early on. Because once people establish a big board, they'll usually sacrifice their weakest thing, which isn't always the best for you. The juice! Alright, so in this section, I'm going to be talking about like all the best cards that you can either top deck, you can search for if you're running tutors and stuff like that. These cards are going to help you establish a win, they're going to get you ahead, and they're going to crush face. So let's hop into it. I'm going to start with some low mana cost cards that are really good, work my way up to just the OP of the OP. So let's do this. Starting us off, we got for 1 black mana, Innocent Blood. Each player sacrifices a creature. So let's say you have one of your rats down that makes everybody discard, and you got Tergrid out. You cast this, you lose a rat, but you gain 3 creatures for 1 mana? That's freaking busted, and that's why this card is so good in this deck. Another one, Vicious Rumors, 1 black mana. Vicious Rumors deals 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent discards a card, then each opponent puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. You gain 1 life. So everyone that's not you discards a card, you gain 3 creatures or permanents, enchantments, lands, whatever, and everybody takes damage, you gain some life. This card's got a little bit of everything. It's awesome. It's 1 mana, absolutely nuts in this deck. Moving on, these are when the cards start feeling really bad, and these cards are getting really OP. So we're gonna start with Dark Deal. For 3 mana, 2 and a black, each player discards all cards in his or her hand, then draws out many cards -1. This card is absolutely crazy. Not only does it make everybody discard their cards, which you will get, and then they have less cards, which is great. You also get a pick and choose when to do this so that you can refresh your hand or just get some new cards if you say have like a bunch of lands and you're flooded. This is a great way to draw into new cards as well as gaining all the cards in your opponent's hands. Pretty freaking nuts. Then I think this one's even better. Siphon Mine, 4 mana. Each other player discards a card from his or her hand. You draw a card for each card discarded this way. This is like the value of Dark Deal plus drawing just for yourself, which is great. This deck really needs to draw a lot because a lot of your cards make you discard too and sacrifice your creatures, so you need ways that generate resources to be able to keep on using your commander as best as you can. So Siphon Mine not only gains you resources from your opponent's hands, as well as gets you more cards that you can use from your own deck. This card is nuts, awesome, works great in this deck. This next card has to be the best creature for the deck in my opinion, because it absolutely has everything you want, period. Rankle, Master of Pranks, 4 mana, 2 and 2 black, Flying Haste, 3/3. Whenever Rankle deals damage, combat damage to a player, choose any number. Each player discards a card, awesome. Each player loses 1 life and draws a card. Each player sacrifices a creature. This guy has haste, gets in, gets both modes of what your commander wants to do in 1 hit, and you can always hit the person that's the most behind in the game and just pop off. Rankle, easily probably the best creature in the deck. Perfect synergy with this kind of deck. 10 out of 10, must run in your deck. If the cards so far weren't feel bad cards, these ones certainly will be. We're gonna start with the best board clear for the deck, that being Living Death. As Living Death resolves, all players exile their creatures from their graveyards at the same time. Then all players sacrifice all creatures they control at the same time. Then all players put all creatures they exiled onto the battlefield at the same time. This card for 5 mana takes over each opponent's board. as long as you have Tergrid out, they all become your board. Sure, you lose your Tergrid, sure you lose maybe a rat or two, that doesn't really matter when you're gaining all the creatures on their side of the field. That being coupled with most of the time the opponents aren't going to have creatures in their graveyards because you're going to be taking them, making them discard earlier in the game, so then they're all going to be on your side anyways, so they're not going to be able to get that recursion from Living Death like they normally would, and that's just going to make the board clear even better. These next two cards are pretty similar, so I'll go over them at the same time. We got Torment of Hailfire and Death Cloud. Torment of Hailfire with 2 black and X, you repeat the following process X time. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. This puts your opponents into a real bind. They have to either lose life, which can just end up killing them, or give you a bunch of cards. And they don't want to do any of those things, so it puts them in a real sticky situation, and oftentimes can end up just winning the game for you alone. The other card, Death Cloud, 3 black and X. Each player loses X life, then discards X cards from his or her hand, then sacrifices X creatures, then sacrifices X lands. This card straight up wins the game. If it's like 7 into X, everybody just loses. You take everyone's lands, you have 21 lands. It's ridiculous. It's OP. You get all their creatures, you get all their cards from their hands, and you make them all lose that much life. It's over. Everyone should just scoop right there, unless they have some crazy combo that they can do. But this card is a game ender. It's crazy. Lastly, we're gonna go over the 2 most ridiculous cards I've ever read for any deck period, especially this deck. Pox and Smallpox. If you've looked into this deck at all, you've seen this card, you've read it, you've been like, holy hell, Tergrid's broken. And so I'll go over them right now, starting with Smallpox. For 2 black mana, each player loses 1 life, discards a card, sacrifices a creature, then sacrifices a land. Worst case scenario, if somehow they have no creatures or no hands by this point, you steal their lands. Pretty sweet. Best case scenario, everyone takes a damage, you get like a creature, you get a like enchantment or another creature, and you get a land. You get like 3 things from everybody, 9 things for 2 mana. Pretty freaking sweet. The other card, Pox, for 3 mana, 3 black. Each player loses a third of his or her life. That's a lot of life. Then chooses and discards a third of their cards from his or her hand. That can be pretty big. And sacrifices a third of the creatures he or she controls. Pretty broken. And finally sacrifices a third of the lands he or she controls. Round each loss up. This is nuts. You're taking a third of everybody's lands. Ridiculous. At turn 3 if you cast this, you gain 1 land from everybody, set everyone back. Pretty OP. If they have 3 creatures, you get a creature from everybody. Ridiculous. You're getting so much value, and it only gets better the later the game goes, and it only gets meaner the later the game goes. So when you cast this later on, people are gonna be swinging bows at the table because this card is that messed up. Conclusion. So in conclusion, what do I think about this deck? Before I can explain that, I just have to say that I wanted to make this video sooner, but I felt like I needed to get some hands-on experience with the deck before, because when I read all these cards and the synergy with Tergrid, I think this deck can't lose. It's ridiculous. It's OP. But this is where my actual experience playing the deck comes into play. Not only will your friends hate you, despise you, send you mean text messages for no reason once they find out that you have a Tergrid deck, they will do everything in their power to make sure you lose the game. So this deck is very hard to win with because you are instantly the target. Not even like playing a card, you're the target. And people want to remove you from the game because it's not fun to everybody when you discard their cards, sacrifice other creatures, and then you get to play with their cards. That being said, who cares about what haters say? You should play this deck. Super fun. You get to use everybody else's deck. You get to be the arch enemy at the table. It gives you the challenge of taking on everybody at once. No deals are open to you. You have to do everything solo, and I think that's a really fun way to play Commander personally. Every group needs a Sasuke, binds everybody else together with some hatred, and then you got to take them on eventually. So that's what I think this deck's all about. On top of this, it is a great budget build. I initially started with $100 and I got like the best core of any budget deck I've ever put together, period. I got some land upgrades that cost a little bit more, extra planar lands. Got the Japanese version, so they're cheaper. But still, this deck really is effective at a budget level. It might be one of the best budget decks, period. That's it. That's all I got for you. It's the channel's first deck tech. If you want the full deck list, check the description below. And with that being said, just make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video. Check us out on Twitter. Check us out on Twitch. We stream every Saturday, 9 p.m. Make sure to go give that a follow. When we get 100 follows, we're giving away a box of Kaldheim. Make sure to get inside that giveaway. And thanks for watching. See you next time.
Wow, why are you so toxic? This is literally the least amount of fun I've had playing a game ever. That's it. It's Focus Zach February.